Music, dance, theater. It's time to take a seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez. Hear from performers, producers, presenters, and creators who enrich our lives in the performing arts. Who's on stage? Here is Tom Alvarez to introduce you.
Hello, and welcome to On the Aisle with me, Tom Alvarez. My guest on today's episode is musician, actor, model, and author Bill Meyers. Join me now as I go on the aisle in a conversation with Bill. Merry Christmas, Bill Meyers.
Merry Christmas.
I was talking with you before we started recording about how grateful I am that you've taken the time from your Christmas Day festivities to chat with me. You know, this is a last minute thing, so I'm really grateful to you for doing so.
Oh man, I'm happy to be here, Tom. I'm glad to share Christmas Day with you. I mean, right here, right now.
You know, we go back a long way, and I love to have people that I've had history on with this show. You know, I've been around a while, as you know, and you and I have known each other a long time. Help me remember, what is our history?
You know, man, it has to go back, and I'm sure it's in the probably Channel 6 days, Paths Crossing, probably some promotional stuff, I mean, early on. And then, of course, on the music scene and the theater, I mean, you know, my involvements there when I was working on Dreamgirls, you were a very integral part of that little circle of folks who helped encourage that production. I mean, that was an undertaking. But I so appreciate it. And, of course, then our connection through the agency and Helen Wells and all the many paths and crossings there. But, I mean, yeah, it's very deep. It's hard to figure out exactly where the origin really is because there's so many different communities, cross sections that our paths just frequently cross, you know.
And, you know, we have that in common, do we not? We both have worn a lot of hats as artists and, you know, not only are you one of the most talented musicians in this market, you know, you're also a producer, you are an actor, you're a model. What else are you? You're all kind of stuff.
Well, I'm a minister. You know, that was a very interesting period when around the time when I was doing Music Martin and Me, oddly enough, just the week after that, in 2009, I started ministerial studies. So it was just ironic that I was, of course, celebrating the life of my favorite American, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but of course, a celebrated member of the clergy. So it was a very inspiring time for me. So ministry is another, and I felt like I've always sort of been on the same path, regardless of what the role or the title is. I've always felt, Tom, that the work was much the same. And I think it was influenced perhaps by my grandfather, who used to stress how you have to be a good steward of the community. And I wasn't really sure what that word meant, or it just felt big to me. And as I sort of examined looking backward, you know, on my life and all those different roles, and there are people that know you only as a musician and don't know anything about, you know, the acting background and so on and so forth. And again, the work always felt very much the same. It was just like grabbing or using a different device or tool in your tool belt. You know, some jobs require the hammer, so that could be acting or whatever, or pliers, and that's music. But by whatever means necessary, and all that God has given you to work with and bless, use everything that you have to make a meaningful connection with another individual. And so how we do that, again, is very different in these different arts disciplines or different roles. But nonetheless, I firmly believe that the goal is exactly the same. And how do we really make a meaningful connection with a fellow human being?
You know, with all the hats that I wear, the through line for me is I am a communicator. Would you say that you are also a communicator in that same way?
Yes, I absolutely would. And it's beyond, it challenges all of the senses. You know, it's not just what you hear, it's what you see. It's how do you paint the entire picture and make that real for the listener, the reader.
And soon you're going to be adding another, shall we say, you're reinventing yourself once again. You become an author. And we're excited to talk to you about that in a bit here. But let's start with how it is that you and I first came to know each other. And that, again, was through theater and music. And you talked about Dreamgirls. Now, take me back. You produced that, did you not? And where did you present that? What year was that?
Dreamgirls was the summer of 2006, and that was a result of my 3 years or so of service weekly to the Indianapolis Cultural Development Committee, which was Bart Peterson's program, and I was on the committee for Indiana Avenue.
Former mayor of Indy.
Yeah,
for those who don't know who Bart Peterson was. Yes. Yes.
So as a result of that 3-year stint, I actually walked out of that quite disappointed, because what I felt had happened was raising the hopes and expectations of many of the stakeholders in these communities and artistic institutions and so on. And then, turning around and saying, yeah, we're going to sort of erase this culture and create a new one. It was a little much to take. So I was determined, almost as a knee-jerk reaction, to do something in some way that would actually celebrate cultural diversity in the city of Indianapolis. And within 10 days, and, probably being motivated by anger and disappointment, truly, sometimes those are the catalysts that will send us into doing something pretty wonderful. So I decided to celebrate cultural diversity, and I had met Bob Harbin, and he had mentioned a possible partnership with the Walker and the Scottish Rite. And when he said that, I was like, wow, that's going to require some real vision to pull that off, because these organizations, ironically, both started in 1927, and these institutions are only blocks away from each other, but a million miles away from each other as far as ideology or sense of community, or the fact that in nearly 100 years, they had never found a particular occasion to work together. And so for me, looking at cultural diversity, this is a massive demonstration of two institutions coming together to do something extraordinary that neither one of them singly could pull off, but a huge showing of commitment and partnership. And that was important to me. And so that was 2006, and that was an amazing production. I had my hands on that. I was reluctant to be in the production. That was my plan, was not to at all try to put that hat on. And as we went through auditions and that, I realized that it was probably necessary for a number of reasons for me to step into to also do Curtis.
At that time, there wasn't the quote same kind of representation as there is now. And, obviously representation has become a buzzword, but it's like back in 2006, we were still at the dawn of understanding what that meant and why it was important. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, this was very early. I mean, DEI and these types of things were not part of the conversation at that time. However, I do believe, just as I sort of talk about in the book, that there's a ripple effect. When you do something, it's an issue of the law of cause and effect. So no matter what that is, and you're doing my little part, whatever that is, somebody is seeing that, it is affecting someone else, it's challenging them, it's inspiring them. So therefore, they show up differently. But you have to lead by example. And I think that that's sort of what I'm driving at. I talk about this ripple effect and, sort of the tongue-in-cheek joke about that, of course, is I went to Broad Ripple High School, and I never really examined the words or thought much about Broad Ripple High School, other than that was the name that was given to the place, and that's what you say when you're describing this place. But in thinking about it in retrospect, and certainly trying to write a book, I think all these things are very intentional. The idea of
let's
broad.
Get to what's the title of the book? Since we're already there, then we'll backtrack, because I want to ask you about some of your other hats. But let's talk about the book.
Oh, sure. Okay, so the title of the book is The Transformative Power of the Three C's: Growing Compassion, Creativity, and Connection. And it feels like that idea has been an operating principle for me most of my life, but trying to understand it, it just surfaced. It was very true. I could almost go situation to situation, relationship to relationship, and find that there were three very common threads involved with a successful relationship, I might add. And that was compassion, creativity, and connection. But then trying to find ways, how in the world do I articulate that? How do I finally come up with the language or the framework to then offer something that is an observation and something that I've lived out in a series of principles that I believe might be of use to someone else. Mm-hmm. And that is the impetus, is what can I share? Every time I don't play music for me. I play music to be consumed by others, to have an effect on others, to lift others up. We do the plays and the movies to lift others up, to tell a story, hold up a mirror.
When will the book be published?
The book is... Okay, so the actual release date for the book is going to be February the 25th of 2025. So we're coming up, and so we're going to be doing pre-release marketing around the 20th of January, but I'm very excited. Yeah. It will be available by February 25th, and it is being distributed globally. Okay. So it will be distributed on, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the different ebook vendors, probably Walmart, Target. I mean, it's a pretty robust list of about 50 vendors.
And what's the genesis of this book? When was it planted in your head that you were going to do this book, and how long has the process been?
Well, I was told I should do a book about 20 years ago, and I kind of laughed it off because I was reluctant to do book reports at school, much less the idea of writing a book. It's like, are you kidding? So you kick the can down the road, but then that idea, that seed is planted. And I would say, God had a whole lot to do with that, saying, hey, that book thing, it's time for you to do this. And I very much felt like it was about a year ago, actually, end of 2023. It was very heavy on me. And so I made a decision, and that was that 2024, I was going to write that book. I was going to finally write that book. And I didn't know what the book was until it was written. It's like there's this book that's calling you to write it. And, it went through different titles, different things. And then all of a sudden it was like, here it is. And then everything started to flow and gather up about 3 years worth of notes that have taken over a period of time, just brainstorming, and then just compile it. And
who is your publisher?
I am actually doing this self-published. I actually started a publishing company with my dad. We're partners in a publishing company called Red Cardinals Flight Publishing. So, yeah, so we're pretty excited about that. But no, we went the self-published route and really worked with some really wonderful vendors and different participants. I mean, there's a company called Miblart who did an amazing job on the cover art. And as I was sort of investigating what companies to go with and what they offer and so on and so forth as far as cover art, what struck me was Miblart was that they were located in the Ukraine. And I thought, wow, I think I'm going to go with this company just because I know that they need as much help as possible. And they've done amazing work, by the way. So, I mean, I'm happy to say that my decision was made because they were located in the Ukraine.
Did you have an editor? Did you work with an editor?
Yes, I did work with an editor. Her name is Dr. Ruth Baskerville. She is located in Florida. And our paths crossed during Coming to the Table, the national virtual group of Coming to the Table, which I'm a co-facilitator on over the last year or so. But Coming to the Table is a dialogue bringing together descendants of white slave owners as well as the former slaves, bringing them together into a common space for dialogue about, the issues that face racial injustice and racial justice and equality, and to try to reconcile the harms and the hurts of that history and figure out how we can move forward in a better way together. So Dr. Ruth Baskerville was a member of that over the last couple of years, and I did not know. She had mentioned that she did some writing on the side, and I inquired about it, and then she said, I said, do you do editing? She says, yes. So my book, I'm happy to share with you, is her 77th book that she has edited, and she made it important for me to understand that the number is 77. So I appreciate her very much. It was wonderful working with her, and I look forward to working with her again.
Tell me more about your book. I know that you sent me some materials and I was looking them over, and, it's based on your experience. You are mixed race, of course, and you mentioned earlier slave owners and the relationship now that many of their descendants have with African Americans. I find that all incredibly fascinating. It's a lot of healing that took place or is still taking place, right? As people are more
Correct.
open about that. And you certainly speak from experience, do you not? Tell me about your mom and dad.
Well, my mom and dad, my mom is white, and she has several brothers, and they come from pretty racist in, the poor white area. My father, he was born here in Indianapolis. My grandfather was civil servants. My grandfather was a firefighter for years and was involved in real estate, and kind of a Renaissance man is my model, in so many ways, because he served the community in so many different ways. He did taxes. He was a real estate guy, and it was like, he's only doing that because Black people need housing.
And he is still a model with the same agency that you're with, the Helen Wells Agency, correct?
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
And I am also on the associate with Helen Wells, and he and I have actually worked together on shoots. So I have a connection with your father, of course, that I've always really cherished.
Yeah, he's great, man. He's great. So, many years of that. But I think that, of course, when my parents got together, it was still against the law, in many, many states for there to be an interracial marriage and all that. The Virginia versus Love story, that actually occurred after I was born. So, so there was a lot. There's a lot of dynamics in growing up at that time. Oftentimes being biracial in, a school environment or what have you, we would be the only ones in that environment, and so that happened a lot. Nowadays it's so much more common, almost any street in America, you know what I mean? Just to see all kind of mixed race and interracial couples and that sort of thing. But certainly that wasn't the case before. And what's interesting to me, Tom, that's still somewhat shocking every once in a while, and even though I'm pleased by it, is suddenly when the big companies and corporations like McDonald's or Burger King or any of these organizations start to do commercials and they're actually depicting interracial families, biracial kids and all that. It's wonderful to see that, but that wasn't the case before, you know what I mean? It was very difficult working in the commercial ranks because, of relationships and looks of people being similar, and you're not quite that or that. You can't really be the son of that or this, So that used to be, the industry used to be quite a bit more boxed in and sort of segregated in that way. Now it's sort of adopted, the new hip look is to include.
Well, do you know this from the standpoint of being in that business, that the fact of the matter is that, as you just said, mixed races are common in advertising. And in many ways, advertising has driven this perception that we're this very integrated society, when in fact it's still not that case. But you'll still have to give credit to advertising, helping people get used to the idea that we could have pizza parties together. We could have blacks, whites, Asians, Latinos all at the same table. It just isn't that way yet, but it could be. I like to think that the simple answer to integration is going to be, it's generations away, but in my own family, it's a mixture of Latino and all kind of blood. And I think it's the face of the new America, but it's going to take time. But you've been kind of a trailblazer in that, wouldn't you say?
Well,
in your early work and in representation, right?
Yes, I would definitely say that, and not the only by any stretch. I want to make sure that to include all those warriors who are putting it out there on the line. In fact, one of the things that I find very interesting is that Martin Luther King's speech, which really was my sort of core piece that I constructed the Music Martin and Me on, his opening address of the 1964 Berlin Jazz Festival. And he delivered a speech on the importance of jazz and humanity. And what he did was he basically attributed, of course, the music coming from an oppressed people, black people in America, and so on and so forth. But he also gave credit to jazz musicians as some of the early civil rights workers because of that very thing you were just talking about, at least being able to dramatize and have blacks and whites coexisting on a stage environment together. Well, jazz was probably that time that allowed that to happen, because of course before all the black performers were white folks in blackface. They couldn't substitute on the musician side. Once we moved from vaudeville to sort of jazz, suddenly you had to be able to play to make that happen. But how that imagery, painting that picture in front of people of blacks and whites. Now, you couldn't come in the same door. You couldn't stay at the same hotel. You weren't treated the same. But when you hit the stage, all of a sudden, it was this great, wonderful drama.
It wouldn't be a stretch. It just occurred. It wouldn't be a stretch to give credit where credit's due to musicians, band leaders, who saw, hey, man, these are just good players. That's all I care about.
Right, right.
And it took people like that to stand up for their fellow musicians and say, hey, we're not going to play here. I'm not going to have you make my players stay at another hotel across town or come in through the back door. Or I'm not going to play with you. Wouldn't you say that's true? It took not that the great white savior thing. I don't mean that, but musicians were always ahead of their time in terms of intrigation, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Musicians, but also writers. I guess what we're really zeroing in is that creative class, those visionaries, these people who are storytellers and have access to an audience. It's like, what are we going to say? What is there to be said on this day in this place? My guys in my band, Bill Meyers and the Trash Collectors. I have a jazz funk band, and where the Chatterbox is our jam. Where the Chatterbox, that's our home. Every last Friday of the month. Now, shameless plug over, but.
We're going to go all over the place today, by the way, Bill. That's kind of, I want this show to be like, I want people to listen in and listen to this conversation. But, I definitely tell our listeners who are familiar about the band, the name of the band.
Okay. Yeah. So the name of the band is Bill Meyers and the Trash Collectors. Now, I wonder why that name. Well, number one, why that name is because I only really have to say it once, because you'll say it 5 times. Go, Bill Meyers and the Trash Collectors. Bill Meyers, and it's already done that magical thing that we hope a name will do, which is stick. It's memorable and all that. But meaning-wise, it's sort of one man's trash is another one's treasure. What we sort of mean is our thesis, if you will, is really looking back at older grooves, whether it's, 60s, 70s, whatever, and sort of unearthing these gems that have found their way on from vinyl and everything else, probably into a dumpster at this time. However, in recognizing and lifting up these grooves of the past, you start to recognize how much of that is still being utilized in our modern music. You know what I mean? So a young person's relating to it because Jay-Z's got a song out using that groove, and the older folks are relating because they know that the groove was James Brown's from Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. You know what I mean? So all of a sudden you've got 2 different generations appreciating the same music. And so, everything comes from somewhere. So I think it's about honoring that past, honoring those people who laid down the groove. So that's kind of what we do as far as Bill Meyers and the Trash Collectors. And I think all music grooves. So it ain't just a black thing. Let me be real clear about that. The Eagles certainly groove. The Doobie Brothers groove.
All of this experience you've had as a musician, and the other things that you've done, again, you talk in your book about from stage to social change. So in your own way, you have also been, through your work, you have been a social activist. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, I would absolutely say that's fair. In fact, in really doing some soul searching on the book, I realized that most of my involvement, Tom, in the arts, most of it was driven by social justice and social change desires, often driven because I didn't see anybody up on that stage who looked like me. And I look around the audience and I see other people who don't look like anybody on that stage either. And it's like, you can make the observation, but at some point you become compelled to do something about it.
So a lot of it for you was intentional.
Yes, I would say so, because remember, at that point, I still remember enrolling in the first day of school, and there's my mother, my white mother, with her twin kids. I have a twin sister, enrolling us in our first day of school in a black grade school, our neighborhood school, School 36. And on the little card had, the question of race. And my mom circled black and white and handed it back to the clerk. The clerk looked at it and then made a scribble mark on it. And what she did was she scratched off and just had us listed as black. And my mother went all the way off right there, right then. You have no right to do what you just did. I am their mother, and I'm standing here, and I'm clearly white, and what you just did was totally took me out of the picture. I remember, so the nuance in a black and white world, you're always trying to figure out and carve out a space. You know what I mean? Because you don't conveniently sort of fit in either one of these buckets that are trying to be prescribed,
And now I'm remembering, I've interviewed you a couple times, and I remember one great interview. I asked you to delineate exactly for people who are still grasping mixed race heritage and what that means. And I remember thinking the way that you described it, you're living in these two worlds and really helping people to understand what that implies, And I recall that, again, the richness of the experience that you've had, but you would also say that it had to be, growing up that way at the time that you grew up, it had to have been quite a harrowing experience, was it not?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It's really ironic because, I've seen, as an adult, I've seen many newsreels and clips from 60s riots and all that sort of stuff. And it's interesting because when they started busing in Indianapolis and we moved from the neighborhood school, the black community, to the white school, I very much recall we didn't have school buses, so we were riding city buses, metro buses. And when they drove us up, there was a whole slew of white people in that community, parents, who were like, niggers go home. Throwing rocks and things. In fact, the police had to make a human shield with their little plastic riot gear, helmet, and the whole thing, human shield for us to go into the school. I only point that out because I didn't really appreciate at the time how close or how still that was a part of the 60s experience. The pushback was still a residue. Even in 1974, those kind of outbursts racially and that sort of thing were still existent. And so it's just very interesting because even though that was the 60s, well, this was the early 70s. And if we account for Indianapolis being that 5 years behind the rest of the country, we sort of trended in many ways.
How did you navigate the confusion that you must have felt about your two identities, if you will, your white and your black, to see white people presuming, not knowing about your white heritage and treating you that way? Was that crazy making for you?
Yeah, but it didn't last long because my mom certainly wanted to make sure that she was present. So, and that's not because, given some sort of ultimate authority over the whiteness of my mom or her being able to supply me with a pass in some sort of way. No. But also then my father being a black man, but he was a black man in a police uniform with a gun strapped on him. So there was a few buffers that probably shielded and prevented some things from even being worse than they were, I felt protected. I never had an issue of my identity. because I knew that was mom and dad. They were never colors, you understand. They are roles, vital roles. So you say mother, father, that's a sacred title. That's not, they don't have colors at that level. That's mama and daddy. And that's, so we were fine. It was just when you leave the house and the outside world's desire to fit you into one of these boxes, a love-hate box or something. I don't know what it is, but it's their desire to want to categorize, label, neatly sort of stack people. And I just kind of can't roll with that because it's a simple truth. My mom is white, my dad's black. I suppose I'm black and white. I mean, that's what the math says. I was pretty good in math, so that's 50-50 in my book. And I suppose you could drill down further in Ancestry.com, but I'm sure you're just going to discover more colors since we know at the end of the road.
Exactly. Did
with a black woman.
Did you feel that you had to adhere a loyalty to one or the other? That you owe loyalty to one over the other? Or how did you navigate that?
Well,
you had to choose one over the other,
Yeah. Well, I don't suppose the choice is as free as one would think, because that involves other people's perception of you. They're the ones trying to put the label on and define. Right. So I don't get to, there's no way I'm going to walk in and get a pass for white because, you know what I mean? I'm not playing that kind of card, So it's not meant to do that. But as far as a loyalty thing, I think really what that really requires, certainly you feel a sort of a peer pressure sense or sort of
that's what I was really wondering about.
A group think sort of thing that can happen. But I think, again, that's why the word I would come back to is compassion, because on those grounds where our real connection is, there's usually something. Like, I recognize that I'm certainly share all the traits of a minority person, a minority, you know what I mean? Not seen as a majority. So I recognize that I'm in a minority. So that is shared with black people, other minority groups as well, right? So there's a lot more common ground. And in fact, what's astounding is when you break it all the way down past these systems, these man-made systems and processes that we try to impose on one another, the idea of DNA and the science of that has really revealed some remarkable things. Most notably, the idea that we're 99.9% the same. That is very difficult to reconcile. The fact that we spend so much time focused on 0.1%. In standing on that to suggest how different we really are, and all of our us and thems and all that are sort of reside in that place, when in fact we all require air, we all require love, we require people in our lives to listen to us, we need to matter, we need to be able to contribute. Those are all the same. We require oxygen and food, but we require community also. And so again, there's 7 billion of us that are more alike than not. And I think we can build from where our common places are. I do not believe you can build from the grievance. I've not really understood or appreciated how shame and guilt and all those types of things can produce a positive result in another individual by making them feel bad. How do we lift each other up? And if we are committed to lifting each other up, then nobody really falls behind. And I think that's as much a commitment from ourselves to another, but I also say it delivers some pretty fulfilling results to us in ourselves when we are of service to someone else. It gives us a rush. We get a chance to benefit from that. And
this relates to what you were talking about before. So why don't we expound a little bit more? You had mentioned when I said, let's cut to the chase and talk about the book, you were speaking about the ripple effect. So expound on that a bit more.
Well, I think it's a simple sort of cause and effect piece. When you see or you do your little part no matter how we all feel small in so many ways. But when we take that action or do that thing or greet someone in a positive manner, or there's that rush that we get. But when we apply our drop, what happens is the recipient of that exchange, the recipient of that attitude today, also is benefiting from that. You see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden we're delivering higher performance from each other because we feel seen, heard, valued, appreciated. Someone just lifted you up. That makes us feel good. That makes them feel good. There's just a thing that happens when you show up differently by making little choices. It's intentional. I mean, we actually got to be on a mission to sort of do that. But what I'm saying is, over time, water is a very powerful force. You know, that little drip will take down the whole ceiling if left unchecked. So it's all these little drips that accumulate. You know, water is the only thing that could actually erode a mountain. Just water. This fluid substance, this thing that has energy. So when I talk about the ripple effect, I think it's the same thing. When you put that drop, that circle allegedly goes on to infinity, beyond what you can even see or perceive anymore. So you are making a contribution to your family, your community, your workplace, and it's a positive thing. And if other people pick up on that and start operating and appreciating their contribution, that, you know, my work does matter, and I always set out for it to be meaningful and to make a difference in someone else's. I think it's the fact that we stop focusing on someone else. I mean, at the end of the day, the idea of service to others, I think, is where it is.
Do you think that's the secret of life?
I certainly think that's close to the secret of life, given the fact that there's 7 billion of us here. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're meant to be together. There is definitely something to be said for, we are here for one another. If not, then why would there need to be 7 billion? You know, it's just one will do.
You know, this is one of my favorite questions with artists and musicians in particular. What do you think about the concept? I've heard performers say that performing, singing, dancing, acting, playing an instrument is an act of love between the audience and the musician. Do you agree with that?
Yes, but I would take it a step further, because we're missing another vital component, which is the third actor in the scene. We just identified the performer. We just identified the audience.
Right. Yeah.
And without stepping too far into a big theological brouhaha, I'm saying the creative spirit, the universal spirit, the vibration that is running through all of these parts. Because the performer feeds the audience feeds the performer. There's this wonderful ecology that's happening, but that invisible force that's connecting between these things is that creative force, the creator. Right. That is the Holy Spirit, the things that can make things move, that inspire, lift up. I think all of that is very much present. You know, I oftentimes we'll be on the bandstand or something in the middle of a set or something, and I'll just turn around to the guys and say, okay, it's time to take them to church. Yeah. And what I mean literally is it's time to create that energy.
You know, as a longtime reviewer, you know, I have spent, countless in my 45, 50 years of sitting in audiences. I always take time to just observe the audience and try to identify. It's always, and having been on stage myself, you know, the energy that performers talk about, and different audiences, and they'll often say, you guys are a great audience. You guys are like, you know, we feed off of you. We need you. It's an interaction that, you know, it's a mystical thing that happens, you know?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
It's the mystery of how the power of music and drama and dance and all those things. And the collectiveness, when you've got the whole audience and they're all like zoned in on the same thing, you know, that's this collectiveness. You can't beat that, can you? I mean, really?
No. No. It truly is a spiritual experience. At the end of the day, I would argue
That's not talking about going to church, you know?
it's completely a spiritual experience. Yeah. We just bring the church right in here right now.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do.
I mean, does it ever get old, Bill? Does it ever get old when you're up there on stage?
No,
I know that's a silly question, but I love hearing artists expound on that experience, you know?
Yeah. It's always discovery. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we've made plans and all that, but that whole thing about, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. So the guys in the band, they laugh at me because they go, "Hey, Bill, what's the first song? What's the first song?" And I said, "I don't know yet." And I mean, we're 3 minutes from starting and I'm going, and the reason for that is because for years we would prescribe and put together these whole set lists and wonder why we started the first song, something went south, and we stuck to the playlist, but we just dug ourselves into a hole. It's because we didn't meet our audience. Yeah, we did not meet our audience where they are. Not where we want them to be. We can take them on that.
And conversely, you can go through a performing experience where you talk to each other backstage. Oh my God, those people out there are half asleep or they're dead. I don't know what's going on out there. We're just not connecting.
Yes, absolutely.
It goes both ways.
Absolutely, man.
It goes both ways.
It really does. It really does. It really does. It really does. So it's completely interdependent.
Your performing career, you played all the major venues and indie, and I know that you've also played with some big names, haven't you, in your career?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me some of your favorite. Let's start first. Tell me, do some name dropping. Who are some of the names that you played with over your career, here and there?
Musically?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, music or theater. I didn't know which one you wanted to go.
Start with music.
Well, I mean, I played probably most recently was with probably Michael Feinstein and Sandy Patty up at the Palladium. That was a couple years ago.
Yeah, and, I was there. I reviewed it. Yep.
Yep. But also, I mean, many of our jazz guys, Slide Hampton, the Hampton sisters. I mean, that was amazing.
Alitra, what were their names? Alitra. I those ladies years ago.
Alitra and Virtue.
There you go.
And Virtue played the bass. And
did you know all three of them, Bill? The third one when she was alive?
No, I don't believe I did meet her. Okay. But yeah, it was primarily the two of them, Alitra and Virtue, that were carrying on.
So you played with all the Indiana Avenue legends at one time or another?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly Jimmy Coe and Pookie Johnson and Russell Webster and David Baker and, I mean, yeah. Most of them, for sure. Mm-hmm. Of course, I did not play on Indiana Avenue because that era had ended by the time. But certainly the guys.
You heard a lot of stories.
Oh, yeah.
People who played there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I was just talking to Clifford Ratliff last night, and we were talking about Erman Hubbard, who is Freddie Hubbard's older brother, who actually taught Freddie, how to play music and all that, but certainly is overshadowed in the greatness of Freddie Hubbard, world renowned, and his older brother Erman Hubbard, who's an amazing piano player. So we just were talking about.
Did you ever play with Slide Hampton or Melvin Ryan or any of those guys?
Oh yeah, Slide Hampton. Played with Melvin Ryan all the time. We were in the same band with Pookie Johnson, Clifford Ratliff, and Melvin Ryan for years. We talked about Melvin last night as well, but Melvin Ryan was fabulous, and he was part of that original Wes Montgomery trio. It was Wes and Melvin on organ, and Paul Parker on drums. And I did play with Paul Parker as well, very early on when I was still in high school. I played some professional gigs with Paul Parker.
And how about vocalists?
Oh gosh, Mary Moss, Cynthia Lane. Brenda Williams, Sandy Lomax. Gosh, there's James Bell, trying to think, lots of Everett Green, Larry Green. Yeah, just many,
Wasn't there,
many folks.
you may have mentioned, but remind me, didn't someone really well known just pass, and who was that?
Jimmy Guilford.
There you go.
Yeah, Jimmy Guilford. And I'm glad you said that, because certainly I wouldn't want to leave him out. I played lots and lots with Jimmy Guilford and absolutely adored working with him. He was the best. I mean, he goes all the way to the doo-wop era and connects a whole lot of historical dots. He had an amazing journey and took me up to Detroit to introduce me to a producer. I think it was Wheelsville Records was the name of them, but it was a contemporary of Berry Gordy, a competitor in Detroit. And Don Davis was a gentleman's name, who produced a ton of recordings. I mean, Aretha Franklin, Freeway of Love, and I mean, gold records and all that stuff all across his house. But Jimmy took me up to meet Don Davis in Detroit, and man, it was just amazing.
The things that you have experienced and heard and seen with your eyes. Wow. I'm sure you've been interviewed by our good friend Kyle Long, have you not?
I have not, actually. That is
really
that is something. Yeah, as much as we've passed across, yeah, not yet. We haven't chopped it up on the air yet.
I'm gonna put a bee in his bonnet. I mean, you're a walking history. I mean, I'm familiar with a lot of this history because when I work at Channel 6, I had the great honor and pleasure of meeting a lot of those legends from documentaries that I produced on jazz on Indiana Avenue and Black history and all. But in any case, so tell our listeners about your TV and theater career. That's a whole other thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, the theater bug, again, I started in high school, and that was, really pretty wonderful. I was determined to audition for West Side Story my junior year of high school. I'd played the pit orchestra for 2 years and sort of saw how it was going. And there was an incident that happened at the end of my sophomore musical period where one of the young white kids, leads in the show, fired off on my band director, who was black. And it didn't take much to read between the lines that there was an assault taking place from a white privileged student, if you will, to a black man who had just been there 2 years. And I resented it. I was so disturbed by it. So my comeback to that was, you guys aren't that special. What you do, I can do. And so my goal was to replace the face that was standing out in front of that stage. So the next year, I was the guy standing there. And so I needed to assert myself a bit. And that started from me playing Tony, not Bernardo, Tony in West Side Story. And that was a big thing because, of course, it would have been way too convenient to make me Bernardo. And I was like, I will not accept Bernardo. I just auditioned for Tony. If it's not Tony, I don't have time to do anything. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, that was the beginning. And then I wound up at Footlight Musicals right after that because I needed to work on getting my 10,000 hours in now that I was on a stage and still didn't understand most of the theater lingo. Yeah. But I knew storytelling from playing music. I often did not understand what the theater director was saying, but I understood what they meant. Mm-hmm. Because there was a language barrier. I just did not understand the specifics to the language.
Vocabulary.
Exactly. So the first couple of years, I would think, if you looked at my scripts, they looked like you were looking at a musical score because I was using music notation to write in dynamics that I understood in a language I understood in these scripts. But anyway, everything sort of took off from doing tons of community theater work. And then I wanted to continue to pursue it. I started doing TV commercials with Helen Wells and all that back then and did quite a few. And then I went to University of Cincinnati as an opera musical theater major. Didn't stay there very long because I was turning down work to go to school. I had already worked in union theaters and that sort of thing. So I literally am at school trying to pay you a bunch of money to teach me how to do something I'm actually been doing before I got here. And so I skedaddled and I moved to Chicago and continued doing theater there, and then would fly back and forth to New York because I wanted to land a show in New York. And I eventually did land one of the soap operas, Loving on ABC, which afforded me the ability to move to New York. And I did that for a couple of years, and then wound up in the revival of Godspell at the Lambs Theater. Then I wound up at the Public with Joe Papp producing a show called Genesis, which I played Abel and the Cain and Abel thing. It's interesting because some of this trajectory, Tom, is like I started to feel like the God guy there for a minute, because I'm over here in Godspell. I leave that to go play Genesis. So I went from New Testament to Old Testament, playing Abel in Cain and Abel, and then landed like a national spot with the Billy Graham Crusade as like a spokesperson in one of those national campaign things for Billy Graham's Crusade. So yeah, I became the God guy in a lot of commercials and a lot of stuff. But I've had the benefit of working with, Hal Prince on Kiss of the Spider Woman, Terrence McNally, John Kander, Fred Ebb, Cheetah Rivera. Really, really wonderful people, man. The name drop is rich. I've been incredibly blessed. Don Scardino, of course, directed the revival of Godspell. Stephen Schwartz wrote all the music, but Stephen Schwartz was there, present in the revival process as we worked through that music. And so, yeah, it's
impressive indeed.
Huge.
Impressive indeed. So, how is it that you landed back in Indy?
Family. One word, family. My grandfather was a huge inspiration for me and sort of the encourager to go out and see the world and do your thing and all that. And one day I talked to him. I was actually in California working with Billy Preston's production company as the head of development for them. And I was in a great place because I was able to start producing and packaging up artists and concerts, and it was a really wonderful experience. So I just was talking to my grandfather just casually, and I didn't like what I heard. He didn't sound as sharp, and it really disturbed me when I got off the phone. And it didn't take me but, about 10, 15 minutes to decide to go in and give my 2-week notice because I needed to get back to Indianapolis, and that was really it. And I was able to spend the last, year and a half or so with him before he passed away. But he's a major figure, patriarch.
Was this your dad or your mother's side?
My dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, my dad's dad was the man, and all of them did stuff at Helen Wells. My granddad did, my grandmother did. I mean, Helen sort of brought the whole family in. It's like, who else you got? So I'm very grateful to Helen and Dan and Lori and that crew, man. That was
you awesome and me both.
Operation.
You and me both. Helen Wells.
Yeah.
She advanced so many careers. I mean, I hope someone is considering a book on her. I would like to know her whole story. Do you know much about her story?
No, not all of it, but it would certainly be a fascinating book because you're right. I mean, the reach of Helen, those, even when I talk about going to New York and all that, it's like Helen Wells had a hand in lots of those moves, significant moves in my...
I had been around a while doing modeling for other agencies, and, I love telling the story about how Helen Wells, in my own experience, I saw at a party, and I just never, it's one of those quintessential kind of like experiences, like someone hands you an opportunity, and it's like, it was phenomenal. She said, Tom, who are you with? And I said, well, I'm with so-and-so. She said, well, why don't you consider coming over to work with us? And this is like magic. Helen Wells Agency, there was nothing more prestigious. Having the Helen Wells brand, being associated with it, as you know, it's opened so many doors, and it comes with so much prestige, of course. But then the work itself, it's been great. So I have observed your career from afar for a really long time, and I consider you one of the giants of our, quote, industry, just because of the contributions you've made in so many different areas, which leads me to this question. what is your impression of the performing arts landscape? You've obviously made a living being an artist in this town, but where are we in Indianapolis now for working artists, performing artists?
I'm curious about that myself. I know that before, when I was, prior to my leaving town, I remember Indianapolis was considered one of the more robust theater communities in the country as far as the number of theaters that we had then in, the 80s, the number of theaters and different theater groups. Now what I see is it seems like I don't see the number of facilities, but I see people sort of ganging into a same space, like what the Phoenix is sort of doing, where they have like multiple little theater groups. Yeah, where I understand the convenience of that, but it certainly reduces the overall landscape, if you know what I mean, and individuality. It's different than when Brian started a Phoenix. He started a Phoenix. Ron Spencer started Theater on the Square. You know what I mean? So they become other entities. And so this whole notion of conglomerate that starts happening, I think sort of dulls down the blade a little bit. Case in point, I was talking to Nelson Price. He was asking me about music. I did an interview with him, and he asked me to, write down or remember as many of the different, sort of Indiana Avenue guys that I had played with, which is a pretty extensive list. But then he said, also write down the establishment that you played with them. And Tom, I wound up naming 30 different venues that no longer exist because it becomes reduced to the Chatterbox and the Jazz Kitchen now. Yeah. But literally, it went from opportunities to whatever we're doing now, which I'm not sure. So the vibrancy and the individuality and the ability to have I don't know if I feel like the community has gotten better, bigger, larger, improved. I think there's more room for improvement.
Well, I think there were those who would say, well, Bill, that may be true, but it was practically a necessity to streamline the process because a lot of these theaters could not hold on to their own venues. It wasn't financially available. I mean, it wasn't viable for them to be in a tenant landlord situation. And funders also wanted to fund people only if they were doing partnerships because they were tired of the same people coming to them for the same pot of pie. So, there was a practical decision for so many of these venues to become like mini cultural centers, like the district is now, for small companies that don't have homes. But I see what you're saying. And fortunately, our dear friend Brian Fonseca, I was one of the original board members, so I was there. And, Brian opened us all up to possibility, right? He taught us what's possible. And I don't know, I guess, it's you're damned.
Which is not a negative, by the way. It's just my observation.
Gotcha.
I didn't say, and I can understand the financial necessity on one hand, but also I would argue there's probably not a big enough a vision on the other side to say, no, if we're going to do it, we're like going to do something, not let me just fit into this categorical, this little drawer space. It feels too convenient. But what has also happened is you've cut out opportunities for artistic things to happen hither and yon. You cut out the options because only one of them can take the stage at one time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it's like, so no one really has a home.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like we're all homeless.
Bunch of gypsies. Well, I happen to run a company like that myself, Magic the Cabaret. We don't have a home, but, that's purposeful. We don't want a home. But anyway, well, look, it's been such a pleasure reconnecting with you. And I always look forward to seeing what you're up to next because you can never predict what Bill Meyers is going to be doing next, right? And now you're an established author. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
I hope you do really well. Do you have a website where people can go to get updates on its progress or so on and so forth, the one-stop shop?
Sure do. The domain is billcmyers.com. Bill C. Myers, MYERS.com.
Are you on all social media? What platforms?
Yes, I am on virtually all the social media, certainly Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and some of those are Bill Meyers Inspires. Because
Okay, and do you have a
podcast.
YouTube channel? Are you available? Can people see your performances on YouTube?
I do have performances on YouTube, and I do have a YouTube channel, yes. And so you're welcome to come and find me on YouTube, and we'll be better curating that, too, doing some cleanup on the old YouTube channel. But, yes, I do exist on YouTube, and come and check me out.
Okay, well, I look forward to reading the book myself, and, that may be a topic for another show. So in the meantime, hope you have a very healthy and prosperous 2025.
Yes, sir. And you as well.
And we'll see you down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Our thanks go out to our media sponsor, Urban Times. Urban Times is a monthly news magazine which serves as the official neighborhood newsletter for 16 Indianapolis neighborhoods, offering news about development, arts and entertainment, and from the business community.
Who will take center stage on the podcast next? Your seat on the aisle with Tom Alvarez awaits. Follow Tom on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and make sure to visit tomalvarez.studio. Watch Tom every other Thursday on Lifestyle Live on Wish TV, and make sure to listen every week here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.